Ohio State football finished the 2023 season with an 11-2 overall record and an 8-1 record in Big Ten Conference play. For the third year in a row, spanning back to 2021, the Ohio State versus Michigan game, the game in rivalry week, the final week of the college football regular season, that matchup would determine who would win the Big Ten East and who would advance to the Big Ten championship game, beat Iowa or Purdue, depending on whether it was 21, 22, or 23, and consequentially compete for a national championship in the four-team college football playoff. Rest in peace to the four-team playoff and college football divisions. RIP. Anyway, Ohio State suffered their third loss in a row to Michigan last year by a score of 30-24 in favor of the Wolverines. Michigan went on to go 15-0 and win the national championship. Ohio State went on with an 11-1 record to accept an invite to the Cotton Bowl against Missouri, where Missouri beat them 14-3 and Ohio State put on their worst offensive performance and I would say suffered their most humiliating defeat since the 2016 Fiesta Bowl, the 2-3 college football playoff matchup that year, where Dabo Swinney, Deshaun Watson, and Clemson just pounded Urban Meyer 31-0, and then he fired everyone. Ohio State, if they beat Michigan last season, they go on to win it all. They beat Alabama. Ohio State had enough talent and was a much more consistent team than Alabama last year to where I'm confident they beat the Crimson Tide. And with Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, and Cade Stover, the speed of Travion Henderson, and a lot of preparation for an elite head coach like Ryan Day, they would have matched up well with Washington and Texas and taken advantage of both of their weak secondaries in the national championship game. But that didn't happen. And Ohio State right now is reacting to failure, to failing to beat Michigan for the third year in a row, failing to win the Big Ten for the third year in a row. And sometimes I don't know how to talk about Ohio State because Ryan Day is a 56-8 record. And if he just beats Michigan last year, they go on to win the national championship and achieve the only 15-0 season, the first 15-0 season in school history. If Ryan Day beats Georgia, whether Noah Ruggles makes that field goal or one of the dropped interceptions by Ohio State secondary is caught, and therefore Stetson Bennett throws 2 picks instead of 1, Ohio State beats Georgia. They finish with a 13-1 record and pound TCU in the national championship game in 2022, and Ryan Day has perhaps another national championship. And we view him, and by we, I don't mean myself, I hope I don't mean you, I mean the talking heads of college football, all of a sudden view him for what he is, a top 5 head coach who's commanding one of the best programs in the country and perhaps the best team in the country entering 2024. They went out and got Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Downs, Will Howard, Seth McLaughlin, Will Kaczmarek, and several other players, about 4 more other players. We're going to talk about Ohio State's transfer portal additions today in detail, but in particular, Judkins, Howard, and Downs because they're the most impactful. Congratulations to Will Howard for being named Ohio State starting quarterback today. And they went out and they got players. They brought back JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer. They brought back Tyleik Williams. Denzel Burke came back. Emeka Egbuka came back. Travion Henderson came back. And consequentially, with Quinshon Judkins entering the running back room, Ohio State now has the best 1-2 punch by a mile in all of college football. This is a team who's being treated by the national media like they're failures, and Ryan Day, their head coach, is facing some type of hot seat pressure, when in reality, Ohio State's an elite program. They've just come up short in a few areas, and really what they're doing right now, in my mind, is what Nick Saban and Alabama do. They're striving for perfection. It's the same with Kirby Smart in Georgia. Now, whether Ohio State ends up achieving at that level this season, we'll just have to wait and see. I mean, Nick Saban's the greatest college football head coach in the sport's history, and most years he coached Alabama, the nation's most talented team, he didn't go undefeated in SEC play because the SEC was that deep. And the Big Ten this season, adding Oregon, USC, Washington, and UCLA, just got deeper. And a lot of the teams last year that were just mediocre or below average or above average or good, in the case of Penn State and Oregon, great, near elite, maybe elite, they return a lot of production. So the Big Ten this year is deeper than it was last year. And without divisions, Ohio State faces a tougher schedule than they ever have in the divisional format. They have gone 11-2 for 3 straight years in a row. And factoring in that the Big Ten has gotten deeper, that Ohio State, Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer have said that this is the most talented Ohio State team that they've ever seen. But as Coach Meyer said, they have to play. And as I've said before about Ohio State, they do have questions. So I think that the expectation for this year is 11-1, 12-0 in the regular season, and playing for the Big Ten championship game and winning it. There has to be some type of margin for error because, as I've said, going 13-0 is going to get harder. And this team, from what we know right now, from what I know right now, and I will say this for every team in the Big Ten and every team in college football, minus perhaps Georgia, doesn't look like a 2001 Miami, 2020 Alabama, 2019 LSU, 2013 Florida State, 1995 Nebraska, or the peak Pete Carroll USC teams. It does not look like they're going to be that phenomenal. And I, in fact, don't think any team in college football will be this year. I think it will be a down year. The expectation should be, again, to win the Big Ten, to improve upon the previous 3 seasons where Ohio State, again, entering the game, the final weekend of the regular season, they were poised to win the Big Ten, particularly in 2021 and 2022, where they were anywhere from a touchdown to about an 8-9 point, 2-score, but still single-digit favorite over the Michigan Wolverines. They lost in 2021, 2022. Last year they played Michigan very competitively on the road, and the eventual national champions and one of the few 15-0 teams in college football history. You see that Ryan Day is making necessary changes. He's adapting to the sport. And on top of that, with a 56-8 record, 39-3 record in Big Ten Conference play, top 5 recruiting classes every year, Ryan Day also managing an NFL factory, which Ohio State has been even after Urban's departure. I think that Day's a top 5 head coach, and I think anyone else who says otherwise is being intellectually dishonest. They haven't fully looked into the facts. There's a slight chance, I'm going to be humble and say that I could be wrong, but I don't think so, on my opinion that Ryan Day is a top 5 head coach, and in my opinion right now, the best head coach in the Big Ten, with Jonathan Smith following close behind him. Ohio State, when it comes to the postseason, I think in the college football playoff, you have to expect 2 wins. More, I think, can get a little tricky. And I say that because Ohio State has not been to the college football playoff since 2020. And most players who were on the roster in 2020 and saw any amount of playing time are gone. And playoff experience is critical. It's very critical. I look at Michigan in 2021, but more importantly 2022 against TCU, where they thought that because they had a 13-0 record and looked better and played better and were the better team than TCU for the whole year, that they could just come in and do whatever they wanted. That's what the 4th and goal attempt on Michigan's first drive embodied. We're going to do whatever we want and we're going to beat you. You can't do that in the postseason, where every coach with a pulse, which is basically every Power 4 head coach, every head coach at the FBS level probably is going to throw everything they can at you. And especially if they reach the playoff and they've beaten Michigan, they have won the Big Ten, there's going to be emotions. There just is. And also, there's going to be matchups against not just some scrubs relative to Ohio State and the elite teams in the country that sneak in. Maybe Ohio State plays Georgia in the second round, or more likely in the semifinals, and they just run into a brick wall. Or the same with Alabama. Or maybe they suffer some injuries in a game, or there's just a freakish game where they have multiple turnovers or something. I'm not saying that it wouldn't be disappointing, but given that they haven't won a college football playoff game since 2020, they haven't made it since 2022, and they haven't won the conference they reside in or beaten their biggest rival since 2020/2019, doing those things, winning the Big Ten, beating Michigan, and winning more than one playoff game would already be a big step up from what Ohio State has achieved the prior 3 seasons, especially with as tough of a schedule as they have. Let's take a crack at this schedule, and also my prediction for Ohio State this season. So Akron in week 1, and then Western Michigan in week 2. Yeah, pretty easy, obviously. And then there's a bye in week 3 for whatever reason. I don't know if Ohio State thought they would have to prepare for Marshall, or they had a tougher former Power 5 team scheduled for week 4, or I don't know. It's just how the schedule shaped out is probably what it was. But take my humor aside, Marshall is playing in Columbus week 4. Michigan State on the road is Ohio State's road conference opener in week 5. Iowa takes a trip to the Shoe in week 6. Ohio State's first top 10 game of the year will be at Oregon week 7. They get a bye week 8 before hosting Nebraska in week 9. They travel on the road to play at Penn State in week 10. They host Purdue week 11, play at Northwestern week 12, host Indiana week 13, and play rival Michigan in week 14, at home in the Horseshoe. That's the game of the year for Ohio State. But on top of that, you have road trips to Oregon and Penn State, who I think along with Michigan will also be top 8, top 6 teams. All of those teams, those 3 are rated inside of my top 6 from my own personal power rankings. And Iowa and Nebraska are inside of the top 20. And Michigan State with Jonathan Smith, all jokes aside about Ohio State dominating Michigan State under Mel Tucker and 56-7 and 49-0 at the half, Jonathan Smith is going to have this team playing up to competition, and Iowa and Nebraska's defenses will test Ohio State's offense, which does have some new pieces. I don't think has the same ceiling at wide receiver now that Marvin Harrison Jr., an absolute legend, is gone off to the Cardinals. I hope he has an amazing and successful career. And there are still questions with Will Howard at quarterback and the offensive line in particular. Now, I have Ohio State winning the Big Ten and beating Penn State in the Big Ten championship game, avenging their regular season loss that I project them to suffer to the Nittany Lions, because Ohio State is strong at so many places. They have the best running back duo in all of college football. They're up there with Oregon in terms of having the best and deepest wide receiver room in all of college football. And a healthy Emeka Egbuka plus Jeremiah Smith, if he is who everyone says he is, and I believe he is an X-factor player as a true freshman, is going to be very challenging for opposing passing defenses to stop. Ohio State's defensive line could be the best in college football. You got NFL player Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, who has first-round potential and has had some breakout game-controlling games. You have Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton. Tyleik Williams is a NFL defensive tackle. Ty Hamilton is an underrated player who's done very well in the rotation, and now that Michael Hall Jr. is off to the NFL, he'll get a bigger role, and I think reload that spot that Michael Hall left. They're impressive on the defensive line. I think that linebacker is a strength for Ohio State. Out of all of the strengths I have listed for them, linebacker, I think, maybe has some questions in terms of just experience. CJ Hicks is really a new player in the sense that he hasn't been on the field that much. Sonny Styles has switched to linebacker. They're both going to compete for a spot. Cody Simon's occupying the other one, but they do have depth and talent there, a nice blend of upside and experience. Defensive back, they have the number one secondary in the country, the Buckeyes do. Caleb Downs, they have Denzel Burke, Jordan Hancock, Lathan Ransom, Davison Igbinosun. It goes on and on and on. The passing defense is going to be unmatched, and the Buckeyes returned 15 starters and 65% of their production from 2023. I think this team's ceiling is an undefeated 12-0 year. The very worst I can see this team do in a realistic sense is 10-2. They're going to beat at minimum one of Oregon, Penn State, or Michigan. And that just shows how good Ohio State is and how great of a job that Day has done with this team. Because along with, I think, Penn State, Georgia, Alabama, and maybe one other team in college football, but I think just those four, those are the only, Notre Dame. Those are the only teams, actually not even Notre Dame, Penn State, Ohio State, just remembering all of my projections and predictions here, Georgia and Alabama are the only four college football teams that I think have a floor of 10-2. Penn State's is because they have a very easy schedule. Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia is due to the fact that I think they have the top three head coaches in college football, and they have top three talent rosters. Good head coaches do a great job of recruiting. More importantly, they do an elite job of developing. And Day is that. He's an elite head coach. I think the storyline for Ohio State this season is the offense. The defense will be elite. The question is, how will Will Howard perform? How will the offensive line do? They bring back 4 starters from last season and add Seth McLaughlin at center, who was horrific in pass block, mainly because of the snaps that he gave Jalen Milroe on passing downs. But in run blocking, he was pretty good along with that Alabama offensive line. How does tight end shape out? There's a battle between G. Scott Jr., Jelani Thurman's a player who's hard to keep off the field, and Will Merrick, who transferred in from Ohio, was viewed as a great blocker. And at wide receiver, outside of Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith, where does Brandon Inniss and Carnell Tate fit in? Very talented former 5-star players who saw some action in some smaller games last year and looked awesome. How does Chip Kelly manage the offense? What decisions does he make? He's a genius. I don't know if he's the nation's best offensive mind anymore, but he's certainly good, certainly great, and definitely can be near elite or elite as an offensive mind. After all, he pioneered, really, the spread option. And now that's a very common scheme in college football, and everyone takes bits and pieces from it to add explosiveness and be able to hide weak spots on offense at times. Chip Kelly's systems at Oregon and also UCLA made quarterbacks who were not NFL caliber look like weapons, like some of the best quarterbacks in the country. How does that all fit in with Ohio State's roster, which is budding with talent on the offensive side of the football? Ohio State only scored 30.5 points per game in 2023. They had the, I think, 45th scoring offense in all of college football. It may have been 35th. I don't know if that's a typo or not, just because that does sound low, but it could have been that low. Ohio State's offense last year was very inefficient at scoring touchdowns, and they had several failed 4th down attempts, like against Notre Dame and Penn State, where if they just had a better run game, they could have easily converted those 4th downs. That's another thing. The run game is going to improve solely because of the personnel. But Chip Kelly is a master at creating powerful rushing attacks. How powerful is Ohio State's rushing attack? I have them finishing with a 12-2 overall record, an 8-1 record in Big Ten Conference play, beating everyone in the regular season, including Oregon on the road and Michigan at home, but dropping a road game to Penn State. And I have them beating Penn State in a rematch to capture the Big Ten championship game, and then losing to Michigan in a rematch in the Rose Bowl. It's hard to beat a good team twice, and that goes for Penn State beating Ohio State twice, which they will not. That goes for Ohio State beating Michigan twice, which they will not. And I have a few reasons to back that up. And to do that, I want to dive deeper and talk about Ohio State's roster a bit more and the X factor that they have that makes them special. Ohio State has a plethora of All-Americans, and they have the second most All-Big Ten teamers, only behind Michigan, and Michigan just has more special teamers. So when you look at the positions that actually matter, I view Ohio State's roster as the most talented and deepest in the Big Ten. That's why I have them power rated first in the Big Ten. And while I view Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, and Penn State as close, if there is any team that is going to separate from that pack, it's going to be Ohio State. It will be. The reason why I think Ohio State will ultimately lose to Penn State, and if they match up with Michigan or another team who I think is physical in the trenches, like Michigan, at the end of the season, postseason, in the college football playoff, it's a combination of things. It's mainly because I don't have faith that Ohio State's offensive line will be a Joe Moore Award contender. And Ohio State's defensive line, I have to see what Jim Knowles does on defense this season. I'm hoping and I'm thinking that he's going to have a more balanced approach than he did in either 2022 or 2023. Last year, he was way too conservative, and it killed Ohio State in terms of trying to control the game. And in 2022, they were way too aggressive. And if you're too aggressive or too conservative, you hurt your team's efforts to control the football game. You just do. And Ohio State has questions at offensive tackle, offensive center. Josh Simmons and Josh Fryer are players that the staff is high on. We'll see if they are proven right. There's a reason why the staff is high on them. They're talented players. Josh Simmons has a positive NFL profile. Donovan Jackson is going to be a first-rounder at guard this upcoming draft. Center is perhaps the biggest question. The interior of the offensive line for Ohio State, mainly because of center. I have absolute faith in Donovan Jackson. In fact, I've listed him as an All-American. Why I think I'm right on the Buckeyes is they have one of the best defenses in the country. They have the best defensive back room in all of America. The running back duo of Henderson and Judkins is college football's best. And I think the run blocking will improve, but to add on to that, I still have questions about pass block, and I don't know how dominant the run blocking will be. I have a feeling that Ohio State's success on the ground will be more so because of Chip Kelly's scheme rather than the execution and development of the offensive line, which is great. It's a credit to Chip Kelly and a credit to Ryan Day, but against a team like Georgia, against Michigan, against, I would even say, Penn State, against Oregon, if there are issues in the secondary in terms of depth and ceiling there can be fixed. And let's say hypothetically against Iowa, if they had a top 25 offense, that kills you. Because elite defenses, teams with elite defenses, especially NFL defensive lines that also have stout, tough offensive linemen and have depth there, I think match up fairly well with Ohio State. That's why I picked the Penn State game the way I did, mainly because of Penn State's pass rush and the fact that their defensive tackles and therefore run defense get better year over year over year. And for Michigan, they have the pass rush. They have two NFL interior defensive linemen who I think would eat up the interior of Ohio State's offensive line. It's not to say Ohio State's defensive line wouldn't do the same thing to Michigan. I think Ohio State's D-line will match up well with Michigan's offensive line. But overall, again, it's hard to beat a good team twice, and I think Michigan, on an average basis, has slightly better overall trench play. And I would say the same for Penn State in comparison to Ohio State. Also, Ohio State has a loaded wide receiver room, and they will remain a threat through the air. But why I'm wrong is, on the good side of things, the offensive line returns 4 starters. And having that key experience could prove me wrong in regards to the trench play. Maybe Ohio State does have a Joe Moore Award caliber offensive line this season. The bad news is, Will Howard is an inconsistent quarterback in terms of accuracy and turnovers, and that could cost them one more game than I think they'll lose. And the defensive line has been inconsistent in terms of output. And by output, I mean stats. And I think that mainly falls on the alignments and the scheming that place the defensive line in that position. I'm looking at last year's wide technique lineup against Michigan, when you should have bunched up more and been more aggressive and probably would have forced a Michigan punt earlier. After all, Michigan only ran for 4 yards per carry in the 2023 edition of the game and barely outrushed Ohio State in terms of total yardage, which is why Ohio State played Michigan that competitively. The X factor for Ohio State is ultimately not the offensive line, not the defensive line. It's not even wide receiver anymore. It's their secondary. Last year, Ohio State only allowed 11.7 offensive points per game. That was second. They only allowed 0.175 opponent points per play, which is second. They were first in passing yards allowed per game and yards per completion allowed. 146.9 passing yards allowed per game led the country. Same with 5 yards allowed per attempt. Per completion, Ohio State allowed 9.7 yards per opponent completion, which was second only behind Iowa. I think the Buckeyes have a plethora of All-Americans, mainly Travion Henderson, Donovan Jackson, Emeka Egbuka, Jeremiah Smith, Tyleik Williams, Jack Sawyer, Caleb Downs, Denzel Burke, Quinshon Judkins, Ty Hamilton, and Jordan Hancock. A few other All-Big Ten players, and if you want to see what team I have them on, you just look on my screen and it's right by their name. JT Tuimoloau, Will Howard, Carnell Tate, Sonny Styles, Lathan Ransom, Cody Simon, Davison Igbinosun, and Jaden Fielding are other players from Ohio State's roster that I have listed on my All-Big Ten team, who are not All-Americans, but many of them could compete for All-American status. Key players who can make or break the season, many are on this list. A running back, Quinshon Judkins. He had 1,158 rushing yards last year, 15 rushing touchdowns, averaged 4.3 yards per carry behind an offensive line that in terms of run blocking, I do think will be worse or was worse than what I expect this year's Ohio State run blocking to be like, factoring in Chip Kelly's scheme. Lane Kiffin is a lot like Chip Kelly, offensive guru, but Ohio State does have more talent on the offensive line and more experience on the offensive line than Ole Miss did last year. That's why Ole Miss went out and got both of Washington's starting guards from the 2023 season to play for them in 2024. They needed to upgrade there. Judkins has also a better wide receiver room than what Ole Miss has. I don't think he has the same caliber of quarterback, but he has a way better defense. So as long as he's healthy, and he was banged up for a bit last year, he will be one of the best running backs in all of college football. He perfectly complements Travion Henderson, who ran for 926 rushing yards last year, 5.9 yards per carry, and 11 touchdowns. Those perhaps are the two most important players on offense outside of Will Howard at quarterback, and I would say Donovan Jackson at guard, and whoever starts opposite of him at guard as well, whether that's Tegra Tishabola or Carson Hinsman or Seth McLaughlin, and whoever starts at center as well, whether that's McLaughlin, likely the starter, or Hinsman. The interior of the O-line, the running backs, and also quarterback Will Howard. Howard threw for 24 touchdowns, 10 interceptions last year, 2,643 yards. He ran for 351 and 9 touchdowns on the ground. The turnovers have to be fixed. That's a must. Those, I think, are the players who will make or break the season. A player who will help Ohio State's defense, but the team succeed in general, is also Caleb Downs. 2 picks, 3 passes defended, a forced fumble, 99 total tackles in 2023. Denzel Burke as well, who's back at corner. 8 passes defended, a pick, 24 total tackles. Jordan Hancock had 4 passes defended, 2 picks, 41 total tackles, also 2 sacks. I think that, we know Jordan Hancock. You know Jordan Hancock. Ohio State, Michigan fans, I would say a lot of Big Ten fans know who Jordan Hancock is. The world will know who Jordan Hancock is this year. One of the best cornerbacks in all of the country. definitely an All-American. So that is my whole breakdown on Ohio State football entering the 2024 season. Thank you all so much for watching. Remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this video down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Braska Rascal for being Heisman Patreon members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Conolula OH, and Ismar for being All-American Patreon members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for being All-Conference Patreon members. Check out my Patreon page via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment to support the channel. Bonus content, like it used to be, is going to be discontinued, but I will be going live on Patreon to do whether it's instant reactions to games or more likely live streaming my reaction and commentary on games. So join as an All-American or Heisman member to access that. As a Heisman member, after 6 months of membership, you do get signed College Football with Sam merchandise, and you can direct message me and ask me questions at any time as a Heisman member. Also, check out my merchandise page via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. What I'm wearing in this video, that's a College Football with Sam Ohio State themed t-shirt. It's very comfortable. Get one, or you can get another College Football with Sam t-shirt in any of the Big Ten school colors. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.